Hi, I'm Jim Barnett. My mom used to say I was born with my motor running. I love to be on the go. I'm on a mission to check out as many interesting places and as many interesting people as I can. And along the way, I want to see who's got the best food. Hey, you're welcome to ride along, but I gotta go. We're going to make a stop at one of the coolest, but yet one of the smallest towns in the entire nation. In 2010, Money Magazine named it the 4th coolest town in all of America. It's become known as the Art Coast of the Midwest. The real name's Saugatuck, Michigan. Let's go check it out and see what makes Saugatuck so cool. This trendy little village sits almost directly across Lake Michigan from Chicago. In fact, if you go by boat, it's only about 90 miles. Stand here long enough, and you might even see the top of the Sears Tower. You keep looking. We'll come back for you. I promise. You know a town's proud of their artistic reputation when the welcome sign features an artist palette. There's art everywhere here. Saugatuck, even with its sister city of Douglas, only takes up about 3 square miles, but almost every open space has some type of artwork on display. There's a fun statistic here, that an artist lives in every 3rd house. The creative works run the gamut from decorative yard art to upscale investment pieces. The whole art thing started over a century ago when artists started coming here to paint the beautiful scenery. Then a group of Chicago artists established what was then known as the Summer School of Painting on Oxbow Lagoon. The Oxbow, as it's known, is operated by the Art Institute of Chicago and offers a wide variety of classes like painting, glass blowing, drawing, ceramics, and even performance art. The complex is sort of hidden away across the Kalamazoo River from the actual village of Saugatuck. There's quite a few buildings tucked away in the woods, some for teaching, some for housing. Marcia Contio from the local historical society sat down with me at the edge of the Kalamazoo River and offered up another little-known fact about the Oxbow.
They have grave sites back there, and the idea with these graves is that they would take the spirit of that session, whether they were doing, they've had glass blowing, and they have tile making, and they have various art projects that are going, but they would take the spirit of that, and they would take the names of the students, and they would take the names of the instructor, and they would bury it in the ground so that for the next group that would come in, the atmosphere would be clear, and the spirits from the preceding session would be buried.
I didn't notice anything too spooky when I drove in. I think the spirits are friendly. Hey, if you're here during the summer, be sure to check the dates first. But on quite a few Friday nights, the students and staff open their studios to visitors. Who knows? Maybe you'll be taken over by a creative spirit and become a famous artist. Art wasn't always the big thing here. Saugatuck and Douglas were both just harbor villages and fur trading posts. Marcia said that in the beginning, one guy owned the whole village.
The founder was William Butler, and he arrived here in the early 1830s. He was a land speculator and lumber speculator, and he would have come up this river probably being greeted by maybe some of the Native Americans that were here. It was the Ottawa and the Potawatomi. And later he brought back his wife and family, and his first wife passed away. And he remarried, but all of what is Saugatuck was William Butler's 86-acre farm. And he platted the town, he named the streets. Some of the streets were named after friends, some were named after past children, some were named after wives.
The white settlers, they quickly discovered the value in the trees that covered this area. The trees and lumber became known as green gold, especially when Chicago and several other Midwestern towns had devastating fires and had to be rebuilt. Most of that lumber for rebuilding came from here. This area cranked out over 50 billion, yep, that's with a B, 50 billion board feet of lumber. There was so much overcutting of the local forests that by 1880, most of the land was barren and the lumber boom was over. Most of the mills were loaded onto ships and moved to new areas to repeat the whole nasty pattern. One of the biggest victims of the lumber boom, and then of course the bust, was a town by the name of Singapore, which sat right at the mouth of the Kalamazoo River, just a stone's throw from Saugatuck. It was started in the 1830s by some New York land speculators who thought it would someday rival Chicago as a port. Things were going along just great. The population was into the hundreds by 1871. They had 3 lumber mills, 2 hotels, a bank, even their own currency. And it just so happens that it was also home to Michigan's first schoolhouse. But when the lumber business went bust, so did the town. The mills closed up and moved to new areas. Nobody can remember exactly which ones, but a few of the houses from Singapore were moved here to neighboring Saugatuck. By 1894, all the people were gone, and with all the trees gone, the town of Singapore was left to Mother Nature. The blowing and shifting sand quickly buried the town. In fact, the last family there had to climb out a second-story window because the sand drifts had blocked all the doors on the main level. The lost city of Singapore is one of Michigan's most famous ghost towns. One of the only ways to even get close to Singapore now is by cruising down the Kalamazoo on the Star of Saugatuck tour boat. The Star, as the locals call her, is a 150-passenger stern-wheeler with an open upper deck. There's no make-believe here. The paddle wheels actually propel the boat. They're not just for show. Some people think there's a propeller hidden down under the water. Nope. The only thing hidden down below is a couple of huge engines to drive the paddles. The Star's hour-and-a-half narrated tour explains a lot about local history and takes you to several spots that are almost impossible to reach otherwise, like the site of Singapore. And the captain, he offers up a lot of other little tidbits. Like, for instance, a lot of the beautiful homes that people have built in the area only see their owners for a month or 2 in the summer. He also explained that the entrance to the harbor was moved in 1906 because the old route forced boats to wind around too much from Lake Michigan to the village harbor. This was a popular spot for ships on Lake Michigan back at the turn of the last century. It was known as the Star of the Great Lakes. By 1870, this was the second busiest port on Lake Michigan's eastern shore. There were times, 100 years or so ago, when you might see a half-dozen ships here at one time. But that started to slow down with better cars, trucks, and roads. Cruising on the Great Lakes was virtually over by the 1950s. Saugatuck's working really hard with other port towns, other states, and even Canada to re-establish passenger cruises on the Great Lakes. They're trying to create a cruising renaissance, if you will. While we were in town, the Yorktown pulled into port. She's the first U.S. flagged cruise ship to tie up here since 1929. Saugatuck is hoping she's just the first of many more to come. Back in the day, a lot of those Great Lakes ships were being built here too, hundreds of them. In fact, shipbuilding was one of their biggest industries. With all the lumber around here and the easy access to Lake Michigan, it was a natural. Saugatuck still has a strong maritime influence. There's almost 1,000 boats that call this harbor home, and it's a popular port from yachts from all over the Great Lakes. You'll even see some from other countries. Everyone enjoys the water, whether you have a multi-million-dollar yacht or maybe something a little smaller. Back on solid ground, when all the lumber was used up in the late 1800s, folks around here had to think of a new way to support themselves, so they quickly shifted gears from Michigan's green gold, their name for lumber, to just Michigan gold, because the new cash crop looked so much like gold. That was Michigan peaches. By 1884, this area was covered with 135,000 peach trees. They worked really fast. And a quarter of Michigan's peaches were coming from right here. And talk about enterprising people, they needed something to hold all that fruit, but most of the lumber was gone. So why not make something that uses just a little wood but can hold a lot of fruit? That's right, they started their own basket factory. They made everything from baskets to berry boxes to crates. At times, depending on the fruit crop, of course, they employed up to 300 people. Fire was a constant concern back then, and sure enough, the basket factory burnt to the ground and was never rebuilt. Fruit and fruit shipping were big industries here from about 1880 to 1920. Fruit production is still big business around these parts, but it doesn't have the big influence on Saugatuck and Douglas like it used to. That's because art and tourism were quickly taking over as the dominant industries. You gotta remember, back in the days before Mr. Carrier invented air conditioning, folks had to either put up with the heat, or if they had enough money, they could try to escape from it. People from Chicago started coming here in the 1890s for those cool breezes off Lake Michigan. It wasn't long before Saugatuck was getting visitors from places like St. Louis, Detroit, and Cincinnati. A lot of those visitors came here to dance the night away at the Big Pavilion. It opened in 1909 as the second largest dance hall in the country, second only to the one on Catalina Island in California. With a 5,000 square foot dance floor, it drew crowds and entertainers from all over the Midwest. The village didn't have electricity back then, so the pavilion even built its own generator. The 10,000 electric lights on the outside were so bright that ship captains could find their way to Saugatuck just from the glow in the night sky. There was also a movie theater that played first-run Hollywood movies. The pavilion was so popular, there were days when it drew over 1,000 people. But sadly, the Big Pavilion was destroyed in a fire in 1960, and all that remains is a parking lot and a few pieces of Big Pavilion era concrete.